today at chord types. Some of these will be familiar to you from higher, some will be new. So major and minor, diminished, diminished seventh, dominant seventh, augmented, all different types of chords. Starting off then with major chords, C, F, G. So these are the basic type of major chords. Sometimes we call them triads because they comprise 3 notes. So major chords. But how do we make a minor chord? To make a minor chord, first of all we take the major triad, in this case C, and we're going to focus on the third note there, the middle note. And we're going to flatten this note, in other words reduce it by a semitone. Where it was an E, we're going to make it an E flat, and that gives us the chord of C minor. It's just a case of taking the major chord, flattening the third, and it becomes a minor chord. Apply that same principle to find the chord of F minor. We start from F major. Again, we're going to focus on the third there, which is the A. We're going to flatten that to make it an A flat, and that gives us the chord of F minor. Again, if we have a look at the chord of G minor, we would begin from G major. We're going to focus in on that third, and we're going to flatten that third, making the B a B flat, and that gives us the chord of G minor. How about a diminished chord? Again, we start from the major triad, in this case the major triad of C, and we flatten both the third and the fifth. In other words, we reduce each of these notes by a semitone, and that gives us the chord of C diminished. Applying the same principle to find the chord of F diminished, we would start from the major chord of F, and we're going to focus on the third and the fifth, and we're going to flatten each of those notes. We're going to reduce them by a semitone, like this. And that gives us the chord of F diminished. Same principle again to find G diminished. Start off from G major. We're looking at the third and the fifth, and we're going to flatten each of those notes. And that gives us the chord of G diminished. So a diminished seventh chord. We've seen already that this is the chord of C diminished with the flattened third and the flattened fifth. Same idea here with F, flattened third, flattened fifth, and with G, chord of G diminished, we flatten the third and we flatten the fifth. And you may have noticed that a diminished triad like this consists of 3 notes which are 3 semitones apart. So from a C to an E flat, don't count the note itself, so 1, 2, 3, 3 semitones. And from an E flat to a G flat, 3 semitones. Diminished seventh is a 4-note chord, so to this basic diminished triad we add a 4th note. And this 4th note is 3 semitones away from the previous one. So from this G flat, 1, 2, 3 semitones again. 3 semitones above G flat is A. Here's the G flat. 1, 2, 3. But, and this is where it can start to get a little complicated, because it's a 7th chord, the A is actually a B double flat. Such things do exist. So remember, if we called this note an A in this context, it wouldn't be a 7th anything, it would be a 6th, because there are 6 letter names involved. Remember, it's the letter names that tell us the intervals. If we're calling this a 7th chord, we have to call it B something. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, that's 7 steps, 7 letter names. We've made it a double flat. So here's the B, here's the B flat, here's the B double flat. Of course, enharmonically, that is an A, but in the context of this chord, we call it a B double flat. Here we see the chord of F diminished 7th, the chord of G diminished 7th, and we can see again, here's a double flat here on the F. Remember that we're stacking up 4 notes which are 3 semitones away from each other. Sometimes we call this interval of 3 semitones a minor third. So from F, for example, to A flat, 1, 2, 3 semitones, that's a minor third. From A flat to C flat, it's a third because there are 3 letter names involved, A, B and C. And from C flat to E double flat, here's C flat, here's E double flat, enharmonically that's a D. So don't be confused about this idea of the 7th. As I say, it might look to you, if we look at E double flat, we can see that it's the same note as D, which might lead you to conclude that it's a 6th. It's not a 6th if we're calling it a double flat. If we call it E double flat, it means that there are 7 letter names involved. Dominant 7th chord. Again, we know that this is the chord of C major, C, E, G, F major, G major. Dominant 7th is a 4-note chord, so 1 note is going to be added to this basic triad to make the 4-note dominant 7th chord. So we look at the major scale, we identify the 7th note. In this case, we're in the key of C. The 7th note is a B. Now we are now going to flatten that B or lower it by a semitone to make a B flat. Here's the B flat. If we add that B flat to this basic triad, we get this, and that is the chord of C dominant 7th, or C7. Same idea. To find the chord of F7, take the basic triad of F in this case. We look at the major scale of F. We're looking at the 7th note, which is an E. And we're going to flatten it or lower it by a semitone to make an E flat. And we're going to add that E flat to this basic triad to give us the chord of F dominant 7th or F7. Applying the same principle to find the chord of G7. Again, the basic major triad of G. We think about the scale of G major, and we know that the scale of G major has an F sharp in it. That's the 7th note. To flatten that, we would make it an F. we take this F and we add it to the basic triad of G to give us a chord of G dominant 7th or G7. Added 6th chords. To make an added 6th chord, again we begin from the major triad. In this case you can see the major triad of C, and simply add to it the note which is 6 steps away from the lowest note. Lowest note C, calling C1, count up 6 steps, C, D, E, F, G, A, and we add this note A here, which is 6 steps away from the C, and that gives us the chord of C added 6th, or C6. To apply the same principle to find F6, again we begin with the major triad of F, add to this a note which is 6 steps away from the lowest note's an F, count up 6 steps from F, and we'll get to D, add that note D to the triad of F, and that gives us the chord of F added 6th, or F6. G6 or G added 6th. Again we begin with the G triad. We add to that a note which is 6 steps away from the lowest note's G. Counting up 6 steps from G, we get to this note here which is an E, and that gives us, if we add it to the triad, the chord of G6 or G added 6. Now you'll know that any chord which has a number after it, you'll have noticed this, the relationship is between the root note of the chord and the top note of the chord. So G added 6 uses a note which is 6 steps away from the root note. G7 would add a note which is 7 steps away from the root note. Augmented triad. So an augmented triad, 3 notes, a chord of 3 notes. If we augment something, we make it bigger. And what we're talking about in the case of chords which are augmented is that the intervals are increased. So to make an augmented triad, we take the major triad, in this case C, and we increase, augment the 5th, this note here, the G. So we augment that G, we make it bigger by 1 semitone to make it a G sharp, and that gives us the chord of C augmented. So we've augmented the interval between the root and the top note. Again, if we apply the same principle to find the chord of F augmented, there's the major triad of F. We're going to increase that top note by a semitone. We're going to augment it to give us a C sharp, and that's the chord of F augmented. G augmented. Again we begin with the major triad of G. We're focusing on this top note, which we're going to increase by a semitone. We're going to augment it by a semitone to make it a D sharp, and that gives us this, which is the chord of G augmented.